In exchange for that, the indigenous people had to promise certain things. And one of the many things they had to promise was to stop being indigenous. So are you telling me you're supporting the move to take indigenous people out of their environment, out of their mindset, and making them associate white folk?
Absolutely not.
But that's what's in here.
What do you mean?
That's what's in the Dancing Rabbit Creek Treaty. It's telling them that they had to go to school to learn to be white.
In 2016, I spoke at the United Nations. Sagamore Billy Guy, he's the 9th great-grandson of the Massasoit. Massasoit, King Philip, the King Philip Wars that began with the English back in the 1500s. Well, King Philip signed a treaty with King James. King James, in order for the Pilgrims to exist here in this country, a treaty was signed so that they would not be killed. There was no peace going on. So they had to sign a peace agreement, the very first treaty that was signed with this country, with the English. That treaty was rescinded by me in 2016. And with the rescinding of that treaty, all those treaties are rescinded, all of them under international law. That is law. The first treaty is dead. It was rescinded on the floor at the United Nations. And
so
the State
are you
Department
getting your land back?
We don't know what we're getting back. We're just now starting the fight. We're just now being able to wake up those black people who think that they're black, who think that they're African American, who think that they're all of those misnomers and all those terms. We are now just beginning to wake them up. And as we wake them up, we have the provisions in place so that they can find the freedoms and protections.
But help me understand.
Yes.
How do you expect to get anything out of white folks' courts of law?
I have cases in court right now, and I'm winning. I just won child custody case back for one young lady up in Indiana. Have another one in Virginia that's unfolding right now. And we have gun cases unfolding across the country. See, there are no gun laws on the books for American Indian or American Aborigine. We are purveyors of the law. We are taking their law and using it, I'll say it over and over to them even. We are using their law to win our protections and our freedoms.
I wanted to go to, yes.
Yes. Now, you're speaking about getting the land back. First of all, the land was never taken anywhere. We own the land.
Exactly. 18 U.S.C. 1151 says that all land in this country belongs to the Indians unless there's a bill of sale. So we utilize 18 U.S.C., their law, 1151, to make sure that we are able to take our lands back. The laws are moving. We're just not in mass and in the news.
And also dealing with the United States Constitution, Article 6, which is speaking about commerce. They say treaties that are done before and after the said Constitution of the United States of America shall be the supreme law of the land.
Now, there's a thing out that they call the straw man. You're familiar with that?
That's dealing with the UCC, but go ahead.
Right. Now, aren't they referring to that as well?
No. The UCC don't have anything to do with constitutional law.
It's commercial law.
That's commercial law. And if you watch the United speech last night from their president, their royal president, he actually done away with that. They about to go back to common law. And common law is dealing with the republic that's supposed to bend. So now everything is going back to gold and silver.
Law of nations.
And that's dealing with the law of nations. It's that y'all didn't catch that. Black people didn't catch that last night.
See, Trump has already stated January 2018, stated already, and so-called black folks are still not caught up with it, where Congress passed a bill called the Thomasina Jordan Act. Thomasina Jordan Act says the holders of colored birth certificates are American Indian. So we have no argument. We have no argument with nobody. I know so many so-called black people, because of their skin, whose parents and grandparents have birth certificates that says colored. And because of that color classification and because of the Thomasina Jordan Act that this crazy president signed, and he argued with them and refused to sign it as a private law, which is a statute at large, which means that it would only be for those few individuals. He argued and chose it and signed it as a public law, meaning that it's for everyone in the
So
public.
what about the ones that are designated as being black?
That's a misnomer. Who's designated as being black, and who designated
On
them to
the
be
on the birth certificates, you have a lot of people that are designated as being black.
My birth certificate says Negro.
Well,
my sister, who's 3 years older than I am, her birth certificate says colored. My mother says colored. So where went wrong? Who went wrong? And who facilitated that policy? So we go back to them that created that policy.
No, you're talking about the policy that talks about colored. And I know my children, all of them are listed on their birth certificate as being black.
It's the same policy. Barack, before he left office, he removed black and Negro and all those others from legal standing so that no claims could be filed under those names. Before they were black, they were Negro. So I say this, if an Indian is an Indian because he's 4 times removed of quantum blood, then this one who's black and his grandparents are colored, what is he? Doesn't matter that it says black, he's still colored.
Okay, now you're talking about black Indians. Let me ask you this. You're talking about black Indians. Where did they originate from?
Fujians, right here in this country. Fujians.
So you're not saying that they migrated from Africa.
Well, see, all life migrated from Africa.
Yeah.
Birds, trees, everything migrated from Africa, but that's not what we're talking about. In this instance, we're talking about the United States landmass, which Agenda 21, as so many people call it, was really the Sustainable Development Agenda deadline, which was 2015, where all the claims filed against the United States had to be filed before the deadline because of the debt, so that the United Nations, who had full control because Barack gave them control in the Copenhagen Convention. Many don't know that he transferred the Constitution completely to the United Nations at the Copenhagen Convention.
Do you recognize John Hanson?
I do.
And how does he fit into the scheme of things?
He's my color.
Okay, but I mean, besides that, how does he fit into the creation of this corporation here?
Well, the thing is, the John Hanson that you're speaking about, he was actually the senator of Liberia. He was not the United States president. And when you go back and you look at that picture, you see that picture came from the 1860s, not the 1700s. His clothing is totally different. They've been putting up that misinformation. I've been busting that misinformation open for the longest, over past 10 years now.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying John Hanson was not part of the federal Continental Congress?
No, that was not him. That was not him. The picture that they showed.
That was a white boy that was.
He was a mulatto.
But you're saying he was black too?
He was a mulatto. A mulatto was not considered black. A mulatto was one that was black and Indian. No. That's where the term mulatto came from.
So you're telling me that there's a John Hanson that was a mulatto?
That was a John Hanson that was a mulatto in the 1700s.
That was the first president of the federal government.
He passed as Passe Blanc.
But he
passed Passe Blanc.
Okay, but I'm asking you, he was the first president of the federal government?
No, not the federal government. He was under the Article Confederations. No, he was under the Article Confederation.
Confederation, yeah.
That was before the Constitution.
Right. So you're saying he was a mulatto?
He was a mulatto.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
he was passing for Passe Blanc, meaning passing for white. But the one that you talking about, the brother who have on the dog suit and the bow tie and the eyeglasses, he was the senator of Liberia.
Okay.
And a matter of fact, he was over there with one of my ancestors dealing with the Washington. When the Indians were sent over there to actually make that colony over there.
Yes.
But see, they're not going to tell you that either.
By James Monroe.
James Monroe, yes. He came later though, didn't he?
Did he?
Tell me.
No, he did not.
When was James Monroe?
You're talking about 1820, 1818.
He was 1818?
That's when Liberia was formed and purchased by James Monroe and a few others.
Okay.
And they initiated the shipping trade of shipping Negroes out of this country to such a degree that Pennsylvania had to pass laws. Kentucky had to pass laws that said no more Negro immigration out of this country. They stopped it because there was so much of it going on.
And then the thing about it, when you talk about Europeans, they also passing for passe blanc because in order to become a monarch in Europe, you had to have Moorish blood. And they showed you that in the movie when Martin Lawrence called the Black Knight, when they kept on calling him the Moor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm sorry. We have a caller. We want to get to the callers. Caller, we appreciate you watching, and we ask you to turn the volume of your TV all the way down. Caller, what is your question or comment?
Yes, sir. I just want to say, of course, I'm very, very dumbfounded by, the guests and what they're saying. I like to refer you to Chancellor Williams in his book, Destruction of Black Civilization, the section called A View from the Bridge. He kind of make reference to these things. My question for the guests is, the Native Americans, I've visited the reservations in the American Southwest, of course, Philadelphia, Mississippi, we have the Choctaw Band up in Gillon, Louisiana. Now, these Native Americans look distinct from a black person or a white person. And so my question to you, and also in DNA tests that African Americans are taking, very few African Americans are showing significant matches of Native American ancestry. How do you explain the differences in phenotype of the Native Americans, such as the Apache, the Navajo, the Sioux Indians in the American Southwest, and let's say the Choctaw that we have in Mississippi, and let's say even the Cherokee, bands of the Cherokee? We know that enslaved Africans, some intermarried with natives, and we know that some of those native tribes had Africans as slaves. So how do you distinguish yourself from the fact that they are phenotypically Native Americans who don't look white or what we call a black person? And I just find it very interesting that you all position. And I'll continue to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna take this one, Brother Enoch. All right, listen to me well, young man. When you go back and you do the so-called study of the Atlantic slave trade, there was a slave trade that happened before that. And that happened in 1492. Actually, it happened in 1494 and going to 1495, dealing with the Arawaks and the Taino. Okay? And then after that, I was dealing with Christopher Columbus, who was a Knights of Templar, and he was also a Sephardic Moorish Jew. All right? Then after that, in the 1500s, you had Ponce de Leon and de Soto came to the Americas, the mainland. When De Soto and Ponce de Leon came to Louisiana and the Floridas, they say they met black Indians. This was in 1540 and 1520. They say they met black Indians. This is in their writing, is speaking Diablo Espanol, which is Spanish. All right, because the Spanish was the big dog of the Holy Roman Empire. Then the French came, and then the Dutch, and then the British. Okay, so dealing with the history, when you talk about black, it doesn't mean that it was an African. All right, the African slave trade from West Africa started in 1650. All right, so you already had the American Aborigines who are mound builders. See, that's the thing where you're getting messed up at. See, we are the mound builders. We've been here. The Apaches are our cousin. When you go back and you look at those pictures, those Mongoloids came down later after 2,000 years ago and mixed in.
Yes.
And then when you had the Africans that was brought over dealing with my family, dealing with the Yamasee, go back and look at the 1715 war. And then that's when it went to the Gullah War, which is also Yamasee. And then it went to the Seminole War. It became Seminole I, Seminole II, and Seminole III War. And we took those Africans. Remember, that many Africans did not come over here on the slave ship. Most of them went down to South America and Central America. You only had a few that came to North America. So that's why it was so hard for them to actually be like, well, who is who? Because when we had the Africans amongst us, we told them not to speak. And we had them in our regalia. And that's why it was so hard. That's where they get the term from that all niggas look alike. And that's why they say, oh, well, you look like you from West Africa. Well, if your mother is African,